Hello, that was rather that wasn't supposed to happen. I pressed the wrong button, so we're a little bit early, but never mind. Welcome to Going Deeper, yeah, I'm Martin, in case you haven't been to Going Deeper before, and the idea of this evening's sort of chat is to go a little bit deeper with our most recent sermon series. This time, our most recent sermon series is News Cycle, where we looked at the book of Acts, and we're going to have joining with me, Neil and Helen, who also preached in this series as well. So I'll be welcoming them in a moment. But before we really get into this evening's chat, I wanted to just let you know about something that we are offering as a church that will hopefully enable you to go a bit deeper with your faith, and that's something called Right Now Media. I just want to show you a short video, and Becky's going to tell you a little bit about what Right Now Media is. So here we go.
Hey there, I want to take a moment to tell you about an amazing new streaming service called Right Now Media. It's full of content and shows to help you, to encourage you, and to entertain you, whatever stage of life or faith you're in. The best thing about it is it's completely free for you to use when you access it through Hawley Baptist Church, because it's already been paid for by the amazingly generous people who support the mission of HBC. All you need to do is just click the link we've provided you with, pop in some login details. Right Now Media will ask you a few questions about yourself so it can tailor the content directly to you, and then you can start browsing. There are so many amazing shows and courses that you can dive into. And parents, there's also great stuff for kids. You can stream Right Now Media on your TV, on your tablet, on your phone, wherever you like to enjoy your content. Happy streaming!
There you go. Well, thank you, Becky, for that. So if you are interested in signing on to Right Now Media, then just drop us a message at admin@hawleybaptist.org.uk, or drop us a message through our Facebook page, and we would love to send you a link so you can get that free. And what I love so much about it is that you can trust the content. Unfortunately, as good as YouTube is, we're on it, so it must be good. You just don't know what it is you're getting. And there's some pretty weird stuff out there. So Right Now Media is just a really great place to start if you want to go a little bit deeper with your faith. I'm going to welcome Helen and Neil, who are going to come and join us. Here we go. Hi, Helen. Hi, Neil.
Hello.
Good evening.
I made a mistake and jumped in far too early. Never
It's all
mind.
good. It's all good.
It's all good. Well, welcome. Good evening. Helen, you did a great sermon this morning, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Neil, you did a great run this morning, despite having a bit of a stinking cold. How are you doing?
Yeah, no, I was skiving this morning and did the Barnes Green 10K. And yeah, you can still probably hear a little bit of cold in the voice. But yeah, no, I'm fine, thank you. Yeah, got around in one piece, so that was good.
Good. I'd love to chat with you guys a little bit about the sermon series, about the book of Acts. Both of you preached, so I did the first two preaches, just to remind ourselves what they were. So I preached on it was the king has left the building on chapter 3 verses 1 to 10, looking at the day of Pentecost, and also Peter and John healing a beggar outside the temple. I then preached the next week on chapter 11 1 to 18, looking at Cornelius. Peter's visiting a Roman officer called Cornelius and baptizing them. And then what did you preach on, Neil?
I preached, got moved on to Paul, and he was in Ephesus stirring up the crowd, basically, telling them that their local gods were no gods at all, and upsetting the local metal workers and the like with the gospel. So yeah, and Paul, once he'd everybody told him to be quiet, just ignored them and carried on. So yeah, and a fray in Ephesus, I think, was the title.
Fray in Ephesus, yes. And then Helen, you shared with us this morning, Rome is where the heart is.
Yes. All about focusing mostly on Paul being on house arrest in Rome, and actually how he continued his mission despite being under arrest in his home.
Excellent.
I really like the analogies of COVID and the fact that we were all stuck in, because nobody knows what house arrest is like, but actually perhaps some of us do a little bit, where we were, if you can remember back, we were allowed out for an hour a day or whatever it was. So yeah.
I think go back a few years, we were probably all thinking, I could be on house arrest. Paul's got it quite cushy by the end. I'd quite like to be at home for that time having visitors. But I think the last couple of years have shown us otherwise.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm just sorry, I was just adjusting. Your mic seems to be still picking us up and doing a bit of an echo there, Neil. But
oh, does it?
I'm not sure.
Just moved rooms to try and make it better, but not sure.
Yeah. Oh well, we'll just see how we get on.
I can try and change machines.
Is that yeah? Okay, you quickly do that. So you get on. Keep this one. I'll take you off the stream, but you'll still be there, and just see if you can get something else.
Yeah. Okay.
So, there you go. Got rid of him.
Oh, there we go.
Just for you guys watching, just to say, the Book of Acts really is it's a second part of a two-part series. Where first part is Luke. We call it the Gospel according to Luke, which is the Luke's orderly accounts of the ministry of Jesus, ending with his death and his resurrection. And then the Acts picks it up after the resurrection, before Jesus' ascension. And although it's called the Acts of the Apostles, those sent by Jesus, actually it's the continuing acts of Jesus through the power and the work of the Holy Spirit, working through those early followers and that early church. And the first part very much looks at Peter, and the second part very much looks at Paul. At the beginning of Acts, Jesus says that you are going to preach the gospel in Jerusalem, in Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the world. And that's what we see happening through the story of Acts. It starts in Jerusalem, it goes out into Judea, spreads into Samaria, and then finally ends up in Rome, which was very much the center of the universe, and it starts to spread out into the rest of at least their world. Obviously, America and Australia and other places like that were not discovered at that time. Helen, how did you find the Book of Acts? Because you may recall, I hope, that because we're in the same home group, that we did the first half of the Book of Acts during lockdown, didn't we?
We did indeed. And I think that that's what I quite like about Acts is that no matter how many times you go through it, no matter how many times you read it, no matter how many times you study it, you're always going to find a new fact or a new perspective or a new way of looking at something. And I think what really stood out, because, you know, those of us that have been around church a while, I'm 30 and have been at church the entire time. You know, I've heard the story of Pentecost quite a lot, but actually I'd never heard it explained in such a way that you did. And I sort of went, oh, that makes a bit more sense now. Like, and it's going to sound really obvious, but it wasn't really obvious to me that actually the whole way through the Old Testament that we see God appearing in fire multiple times. And so when at Pentecost, when actually that fire comes down and then splits over everyone, sort of thing, you know, it appears on lots of people, you're like, oh, because now God's Holy Spirit, God is still big and that big, amazing thing, but actually through his Holy Spirit, he is now in and with each and every one of us. And that sounds really obvious, but I think that I hadn't put the two and two together about the fire in the Old Testament and the fire of Pentecost. I think I'd always, known around, the fire coming down, really symbolizes that, but not to the extent of how it links to the Old Testament. And that was a really sort of transformed that whole story a little bit and gave it a whole new light, which was really nice. And I really appreciated.
Don't worry, I hadn't clicked on that either. And I think
I feel better now.
It's that little detail that Luke adds into the story of the tongues of fire going out to each individual. He's added that detail because it's so important. This isn't just God filling up the space like he's done in the Old Testament. Actually, it's going to every single person individually and filling them as they receive the Holy Spirit. And and
it would have been really obvious to the first readers because they'd have known, the Old Testament, as we call it, inside and out, a lot of them. And so it's like, oh yeah, because God always appears in fire, so fire, obviously. And here we are 2,000 years later going, oh yeah.
Aha, Neil comes back.
Good evening. Different room, different computer. Let's hope less feedback.
No feedback at all.
That's good.
And I love the way you managed to put yourself on the screen. I didn't even have to do it. Was that Angie, your wife, coming in? And
I might have been.
Yeah. We were just chatting about some of the stuff that jumped out for us about Book of Acts. Helen was saying about the story of Pentecost and how it mirrored some of the occurrences of God's glory filling the place in the Old Testament. And just wonder, was there anything that jumped out to you? Because I think for me, I know most of the story in Acts, but usually from sermons or Sunday school from a long time ago, and I miss the details. So actually, it's really good to read it again and get the story again. Yeah,
I think the thing that I knew, but was good to remind me, was just it's all about the power of the Holy Spirit. If you look at the 12 disciples, they were right sort of bunch, really, weren't they? And have you ever seen that thing where a firm of management consultants came into the first century church and went through the 12 disciples and decided which ones had the talent for leadership and starting a new. Let me read this to you. It's tongue in cheek, but it proves a point. I found it just a little while ago. Thank you for submitting the resumes of the 12 men you've picked for the management positions in your new organisation. All of them have now taken our battery of tests. It's the staff opinion that most of your nominees are lacking in background, education and vocational aptitude for the type of enterprise you are undertaking. They do not have the team concept. Simon Peter is emotionally unstable and given to fits of temper. Andrew has absolutely no qualities of leadership. The two brothers, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, place personal interest above company loyalty. Thomas demonstrates a questioning attitude that would tend to undermine morale. And he goes on and on and on. It says the only one that's got any aptitude is Judas Iscariot, and it just it's tongue in cheek, but it just reminds me that this isn't about us; it's about the power of the Holy Spirit, and I think that came through in all 4 sermons, and certainly it reminded me. Yeah, Paul did amazing things, but he did amazing things because the Holy Spirit was working inside him. And I knew that, but I just got reminded of it, I think, 4 weeks in a row, basically.
Yeah. Because the book of Acts is really, it's the story of that emerging church coming out from the ministry of Jesus and starting to expand and spread. And really, you're looking at the book of Acts like, how on earth did that manage to happen? How is it that we are now, Christianity is now the biggest religion in the world? And you look at the book of Acts, you think, this shouldn't be happening. It's just constantly hitting barrier after barrier, persecution, murder. Paul himself lists later on in one of his letters that he was whipped and beaten, shipwrecked 3 times. He ends up in Rome in house arrest. As Helen pointed out, he was arrested quite a few times. Riots. This is not a religion that should have taken off, really, should it?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Especially not, as Dad was saying, as Neil was saying, my dad. Actually, it's very confusing in these moments what to call him. But actually, especially with the personnel that they had, it really shouldn't have taken off, and just shows even more so, actually, that power. Because, even now we're, an unqualified bunch, to say the least.
Yes.
But actually, we're the whole, God doesn't call the qualified; He qualifies the called. Sort of.
Ooh, like that, yeah.
Well, and actually, but we're all called to do these things, and we can do it. And not from Acts, admittedly, but there's that other verse that talks about actually that we've got the same power that Jesus had, and so actually that's how we can do this stuff. And I think that's pretty class.
Yeah, cool. Daz has asked a question. He said, "What do you think is the coolest story in Acts?" I don't know exactly how you define coolest. I guess, do you have a particular favourite story in Acts?
Oh,
I guess the Sunday school answer is the day of Pentecost, because if that didn't happen, then the rest of it wouldn't happen. But it's just story after story, isn't it?
yeah. I'm going to take the other Sunday school answer, and actually Paul's Damascus Road experience.
One that we didn't cover in the series.
We didn't cover it in the series. Dad and I both mentioned it, sort of thing in ours, and I'm sure you did as well. I can't remember. It feels like a long time ago. But I know you were talking about Peter, so maybe not.
Yes, I would talk about Peter.
But actually, but he was, an unashamed Christian killer. He was the worst of the worst when it came to Christians. But actually, he then turned around to become one of the biggest influencers known to man. And that can only be through such an incredible experience, such as Paul's Damascus Road, which I think I think that does come into the category of cool. I think it is a cool story.
Yeah. See, I like one of the 3 times that Paul gets shipwrecked. I think it's at Malta, and he gets bitten by a snake, and everyone thinks he's done something really bad. He must be a criminal, and he's perfectly fine. And then he just heals everyone on the island. I think I might be muddling up the stories a little bit.
No, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he just sort of shakes it off and like, oh no, he's gonna be been bitten by a snake, he's gonna die, he must be off, blah, blah. And he just like shakes it off and goes, yeah, all right. Who else needs healing? It's brilliant.
Yeah, no, it's great. Just say we were encouraging people to read through the whole of the book of Acts. So I think Karen, Sue, and Caroline are currently on chapter 25 at the moment. There's only 28 chapters, so they're approaching the end. So big well done to you 3. And hopefully you've enjoyed the story. And you probably know more cooler stories than we do. So well done. Daz says, it's amazing that we can read the account of people 2,000 years ago and experience it with new relevance. Do you think this story is relevant? I mean, it's about first Christians in a completely different setup to us, in a completely different situation, completely different time. Is it really relevant? Neil, what do you think?
Absolutely. And I wonders, in some way, we're in different times because, you know, we've got electricity and the internet and, you know, all sorts of knowledge. But actually, is it that much different? You know, man is still man. We still make the same mistakes that we made 2,000 years ago. We still have the same spiritual needs we had 2,000 years ago. I just think maybe in the present day, everybody's, you know, the story I had is everybody got upset with Paul and wanted to lynch him. I think one of the differences certainly in the Western world is that everybody now just shrugs their shoulders and says, well, if you want to believe that, that's fine with me. And, you know, you do your thing and I'll do mine. But I think other than that, I think, you know, the story's the same, grace is the same. And people, are still looking for, you know, whatever that song says, you know, they're still looking for the real meaning of life. And they were then, and I think probably people still are now. Don't know anybody else thinks.
Yeah. What do you think, Helen?
Yeah, and I think obviously I'm slightly biased because it's what I talked about this morning. But as Dan alluded to earlier, that actually I think we go, oh no, but that's very different to we go through now. But actually, you know, as I said this morning, I was talking about Paul being on house arrest. But for the last 2.5 years, we've been in and out of our own little house arrest with COVID lockdowns. And I think so actually, even as we look at things that have changed, and actually there are still things that we can find that relevance in. So everything that Dad said, but also various situations that we find ourselves in. And yeah, where Dad said, you know, people just sort of shrug their shoulders now where they wanted to lynch Paul. We've now got this whole sort of thing about cancel culture, and actually, which is probably our modern day lynching. And actually just people just being cancelled left, right and centre because of one thing they said or one thing that they did. But actually that's really real in our culture and really real in the West. And I think that actually that's a very similar thing that we can find ourselves being like, oh no, but we won't do that because we might get cancelled. It's slightly less major if you're not a major celebrity, but it's a still very real thing as well that we find ourselves having to deal with.
Yeah.
We've also got work politics as well. So as we sort of look at Paul unashamedly talking about everything, actually, I work for the local council. I can't go around telling everyone what I think and what I believe because that's not allowed in the workplace. As you know, many of my friends in the NHS will tell you they have the same sort of battles. And so it's finding the places that actually, where am I going? Or actually, I'm hiding it, or where am I protecting myself? But similarly, where am I also, you know, doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing? And where am I finding that line? And I think Paul challenges us. That line is probably further than we think it is. And so we have those same challenges, but different ones all in the same breath.
Yeah. It's a question that Jenny, my wife, is asking. Says, why don't we have similar acts like those of Acts today? You know, in Acts we have miraculous signs of all sorts of amazing things happening, people coming to know Christ from all sorts of different backgrounds. And Jenny's saying, well, why don't we have that today? Or do we? I always feel fired up and hungry for more when reading Acts. Did you feel fired up and hungry for more? And why do you think we're maybe not seeing these sort of things in our normal day-to-day lives? Helen?
I think part of it is probably, I mean, I don't know. That's a really good question, Jen. I think potentially some of it might just be our sort of Western politeness, our sort of very Britishness, and we don't want to throw the curveball too much. We don't want to rock the boat. And so therefore we don't take as bigger steps. We don't take as bigger bold statements and bold moves. You know, it takes quite a person to be like, come here and I'll heal you, as Paul did, sort of thing. And I think that whether that's because we've got less confidence than Paul did or less that's probably each and every individual person. You can speak to some people and they would say we have very similar things that happen today, whether that be in their culture or their church or their community or their part of the world. But I think for me here in, leafy Surrey, is for me it's probably a bit of a British nervousness to do anything bold, because we completely have the same power and that same ability, because it's not us, it's Jesus working through us. So I think they completely can happen today, and I wonder whether sometimes it's us not just being bold enough to live it out.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. Neil, what do you think?
I agree with Helen. I think it's a really good question. I'm not sure I definitely know the answer. I think, yes, part of it is us in that I think we've taught ourselves to be fairly self-reliant, particularly in middle-class England, and therefore we don't need to rely on God, and therefore we rely on ourselves far too much. And I also wonder, and this is where you probably need a biblical scholar rather than ex-bank manager, is that does God move in different ways in different times? Yes, obviously God can do anything, but I think throughout the period of history, have there times where he's moved greatly, and there's other times that people have searched for him a bit more. And that's probably down to the people and not down to God. But bring on a biblical scholar and they can answer that one, because I'm not sure I know.
Just two books that I would encourage people to read. I can't remember the authors, but one's called Scattered Servants and one called Sustainable Power. Scattered Servants is a story of a vineyard church on the east coast of Ireland, and Sustainable Power is a story of a New Frontiers church outside Bedford. And both of those are stories of the church experiencing Acts, like we saw in the book of Acts. And it came from them deciding to step out of their church into the community. And I think certainly with Sustainable Power, it was them deciding they wanted to do a healing ministry, and they were going to have a certain number of healings happen in the next year. And they pursued that. And I know certainly Scattered Servants is just an amazing story of a church growing and experiencing these amazing things that we see in the book of Acts. And I think it is, we don't exceed them because we don't need them, because we don't put ourselves in positions where we have to rely so much on God to act in a miraculous way. And I don't think it's as simple as a 1 + 2 = 3. I think but actually it all adds up. If more and more of us are looking for the miraculous, there's more and more chance that we're going to experience it in our lives and in the life of the church.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. I always say I've only ever won one competition, in the back of a cereal packet or something. But then I've only ever entered one. So I've actually got 100% hit rate. And I think the same thing perhaps goes with, it's not a great analogy, but the same thing goes a little bit with trusting in God. That if we never really trust him, then we're never going to see that, movement of God responding to our need, if you know what I mean. I'm not saying it's like entering a competition, but if we do put our trust in God, then it's down to God a little bit. And all the time that we don't, and we just rely on our own skills and abilities, then we'll never know.
Yeah, no, definitely. So if you could take some lessons from the book of Acts, which we know is not the same context by any stretch, but we believe it is relevant. Are there any particular lessons from the teaching series or anything that's come out in your own preparation that you think, those are some lessons that I can take and apply to my own life? Helen, what do you think?
I think that probably for me, one of the main things is that actually we can't let our circumstance dictate our response.
Yes.
I think that
this morning.
I did. But I think we saw that with Paul. I think we also saw it with Peter. I think we see it time and time again the whole way through the Bible, in all honesty. But it's really apparent in Acts that actually we can't find excuses because there's never an excuse to not be doing the whole Jesus thing, to not be following him, to not be talking about him, to not be living the way that he wants us to. Because, as I said this morning, if anyone had a good reason not to, I think Paul did, with the amount that he was, beaten and shipwrecked and stoned and imprisoned and the lot. I think that actually, if anyone had a reason to be like, you know what, I'm just going to take a break, guys. I think that was probably it. Me here in lovely leafy Surrey, I don't think I've got that quite same excuse. And so it was a real encouragement that actually God can do these amazing things. And actually we've got that same power to be able to do those amazing things. That's also a huge challenge because we don't really have an excuse not to.
Yeah. Thank you, Helen. Neil, how about you?
Yeah, funnily enough, the thing that struck me was one of the lines out of my sermon. You probably tend to remember what you say rather than what you hear, isn't it? And it was simply that you can sum up Acts in Acts 1:8, and there's this sort of chain reaction really that the power of the Holy Spirit will come is the first part, and then the second part is you'll be my disciples in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. And if you don't get the first part right, you got no chance with the second. And so often we may try and do the second bit without worrying about the first part. And obviously we have the Holy Spirit, but so that's the bit that's challenged me most, is just that one verse, and probably the first part of that verse is that, do I look for more and more of God's Holy Spirit in my life? Because once I got that right, preaching to the ends of the earth will probably be that much easier than I find it at the moment, which is not very easy at all. So the first bit of Acts chapter 1, you will receive my Spirit, and let's go from there.
Yeah. I think for me,
what about you, Martin?
Yeah, I think for me, it's this idea of what a full life looks like, and what we see with those characters in the book of Acts, those early followers of Jesus, is them living their life to the full. And what it doesn't mean is everything's hunky-dory. Paul, we left him this morning in house arrest, and we know that he ended up having his head chopped off. So it's not exactly a life that I would go for, and yet that's the life that Jesus is offering us, an exciting life, a life full of purpose, a life that's being directed by the Holy Spirit, a life where we're experiencing those acts of God in an amazing way. But it's not the life that the world offers us. And I think I don't know if this is a lesson I'm actually going to learn, because it's very different to kind of think, well, this is a great lesson, but actually applying to my life. Because I spend so much time trying to make my life, get the life that the world offers me, comfortable, well off, all the things I need. That's not the life God's offering us. God is offering us a better life. And I just wonder whether I'm missing out on that because I'm pursuing a different type of life to the one that God's offering us. Just going to put, Michelle says, to follow and believe in what you believe. This is the lesson she's learned. To follow and believe in what you believe, because no matter what the heartache, God will pull you through it. Did it for Paul. I guess I get that from the book of Acts. Yes, definitely. What you were talking about this morning, Helen, was that God was there with Paul and had him in exactly the right place. You talked about detours this morning.
That God won't use your detour for someone else's salvation.
Yes, yeah. And I think because me and Dan were reflecting on that, we were doing the live stream this morning, reflecting that actually isn't a detour.
Mm-hmm.
We think it is, but it's not.
Yeah.
We can, us often when we look back and realize, you know what, that wasn't a detour. That was helping me to become the person I was supposed to be and put me in the situation, like you said, with you being at Wolverhampton University, Helen, of that place where you could be part of that CU, lead missions, and see people come to Christ and baptize people. Yeah. It wasn't a detour. It just seemed like it. Time.
Exactly. It was a detour from what I had planned, but definitely not from what God had planned.
Yeah. Well, we've got one. Jenny says, faith, the Holy Spirit, trusting and willing to take the first step. God will guide us and be with us. I think it's that first step, which is probably the most difficult one. I find that with exercise. Do you find that when you haven't done the exercise for a while, and it's the most difficult thing is to actually get out the door and do a run or go?
I don't think I can contribute to this when you two have both done a 10K in the last week.
Well, no, we're in the role, the role of it now. Helen, how do you feel about going off and doing a 10K?
Yeah, no.
No, there you go. That's my point exactly. It's very difficult to do the first step. Once you're on a roll, it's different challenges. But getting out there and trusting God is the most difficult thing, and probably why we're not seeing all those acts that we saw in the Book of Acts.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, guys. Thank you for being with us this evening, but also thank you for the sermons for the last 2 weeks as well, and being part of this series.
And obviously, we need to say, Martin, thank you so much for those news broadcasts. We've enjoyed them so much.
Well, there won't be any of those for a while.
I did have a request that you actually hosted this evening like Hugh G. Barnett. Someone asked me this morning, will he be doing it in character?
No.
I don't think I can persuade him round, I'm afraid.
Just to say, our series starting not next week because it's harvest, but the week after is Controversial Jesus.
Ooh.
Where we're going to be going a bit deeper into the Sermon on the Mount and just seeing how controversial it actually is, and the fact that as a church for the last 2,000 years we've been trying to get out of that teaching and not have to actually live up to it. So that's what we're going to be looking at in October. So and we'll be going deep at the end of that with Joshua and hopefully Phil as well. So
excellent.
Yeah. So thanks, guys. Thank you to everyone online. Remember, if you have any questions, then contact us at gotquestions@hollybaptist.org.uk, and we'd love to at least try and answer them, although we can't promise anything. And if you want any prayers, anyone to pray for you, then contact us at prayer@hollybaptist.org.uk. And thank you very much. Do like this video, to subscribe to our channel, and do follow us on Facebook and Instagram as well. Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Take care.